Welcome to the official podcast of Eternia.com. We have the power. I'm your host, AJ, aka Voodoo Magic, aka Zor. And sitting hundreds of miles away from me is my right-hand man-at-arms, Colt, aka Red Pyramid, aka Dad-at-Arms. How you doing today, Colt?
I'm doing very good, AJ. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing good too. Me too. And this is because today we have an exciting episode. For anyone who's been with Eternia.com since the beginning, I wouldn't have created that site if it wasn't for the 2021 Netflix series, Masters of the Universe Revelation. I mean, this For Eternia podcast that Colt and I do would not exist if it wasn't for this amazing show that fueled our fire and support and appreciation. So it's extremely exciting for both Colt and I to have one of the creators of this series on with us today, one of its writers on this podcast. And he's not just a writer of 3 episodes, but he's also a writer on the Revelation prequel comics as well. So, without further ado, you know him, we love him. We'd like to welcome Tim Sheridan. Hi, Tim.
Hey. Hi, thanks for having me. You
and
love
we're so
me?
glad to have you.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course we love you.
I love that you
Definitely.
have. I just noticed you have Revelation up there, the comics up there behind you.
I do. Yep. And this is actually the one that you signed at one of the comic events. I wasn't able to be there to get it signed. I had to buy it secondhand and have it shipped, but I do have it, and it's framed in a nice little frame.
That was a fun event with Kevin and
yeah,
Rob.
it looked like a lot of fun.
Yeah. There's a lot of people.
Yeah,
there. My goodness.
Yeah, I remember I got one of those books that was signed by Kevin Smith and yourself, Tim, and from Rob David. And Rob and I commented before, Rob David's signature looks like an infinity sign. It's just like it's figure 8.
It's a clue. Maybe it's a clue. I don't know.
Yeah. Motu infinity.
And
we would know. We don't know. We don't know what's in store.
You know, Tim, our YouTube audience already knows this this colorful jacket I'm wearing. This extremely spectacular Masters of the Universe Revelation jacket is something I only wear on special occasions, and you, sir, are a special occasion.
Oh,
so
that's very kind.
So
very kind.
Have you seen these before? They're by Chalkline. They're like.
Does it have Orko on the back?
No, this one has Castle Grayskull on the back.
Yeah, I had one that was like all Orko, and yeah, that's great. It's got the Revelation. That's beautiful. That's awesome. Yeah, you should only wear that for special occasions. Don't wear that out, especially because Masters of the Universe Revelation is done, and now Masters of the Universe Revolution is coming. So that's it. It's a moment in time now. Revelation.
It's a collector's item now.
That's right. Which I can see.
It's just gone up in value.
I am very jealous of both of your Motu setups behind you. I have stuff from various other things that I've worked on. Some Motu stuff. I only put up my Orko cell for you, which Kevin Smith gifted me at a PowerCon when we were getting started in the process. But these guys are over here, the Mondo Hordak, and which was a gift from someone else associated with the Revelation show, and these guys who are one of my favorite trios.
And also see
Lynn and Scareglow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so this behind me here, this is just a small portion of my setup. On the wall that I'm looking at right now, I've got an entire wall full of He-Man action figures and toys and posters.
My He-Man shelves are over there. Because I don't have I should have maybe just turned the camera for this interview. I'm sure your collections must completely would put my little pittance of a collection to shame, but But some cool stuff. All this Revelation stuff too, AJ. Like that is that. Look at that draped behind you. That Grayskull print behind you. That's
it's a flag.
It's a flag.
It's a flag. Yeah.
Did you have it made? Or did somebody make that? Did someone sell that?
Someone sold it. I believe it was on eBay. I'm not sure if it was official or not. I can't be honest. This jacket definitely is, but I'm not sure. But the flag is great, and I have a carpet underneath me as well.
Oh, really?
And
do you have the Grayskull dungeon rug? Have you seen Super 7?
I've seen that one. It's like the grate with all the creatures coming up.
Oh
yeah, that one's good.
Yeah.
I have the rug at my feet is the old the rug that I'm standing on. It's the old toy poster where it's got Castle Grayskull in the background, and then on either side are the evil warriors and the heroic warriors with He-Man and Skeletor on their cats facing off. So that's what I'm looking at on my floor.
A rug. This is all. I just have hardwood floors. Maybe we'll paint them. That's
what's wrong with you, Tim?
No, I used to be a much collector. I used to be a real serious action figure collector. I mean, I still collect a bunch, but much more when I was younger. In fact, it's how I sort of became friends with Teddy Biaselli back in the day. Like, we've been friends for more than half our lives. Wow. And we kind of shared a love for action figures and 80s stuff in particular, the shows we grew up on, which some of them are depicted here behind me. Most of that stuff is some of it's made its way into my office. Some of it is in mothballs. Some of it is I have a den that is really the toy room. That's just wall-to-wall shelves of toys, but nothing like his collection. My goodness, that guy. I don't know if you've ever seen
his is fantastic.
It's absurd. It's absurd.
Yeah, he has us all beat.
It puts us all to
sure.
Yep.
Nobody will ever catch it.
No.
Nobody.
No, we're not worthy in his presence. So
that's the thing, though. You are. Like, that's the thing about him. You know.
Well, and that's it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, he is another one of this creative team that is just so nice to talk to, and you can just feel the love for this franchise and for the fans, and just as a good person.
Like, Ted is a guy
oozes off of him.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who has a certain base of power in Hollywood based on his position at Netflix right now, and the other companies he's worked, Disney and the Hub he worked at before, and in that capacity, of course, because he respects what I do, he's opened a couple of doors for me, and that's been really great. But I always think about, like, the most important thing for me in our relationship is not the professional part of it. It's the personal part of it. It's the fact that when you work in this business, you can be at any level. Like, I'm nobody in this business, but like, say, like Kevin Smith, he's like a big celebrity, but like the problems and the things that come up for a Kevin Smith are the same kind of problems that come up for a guy like me, except on a much smaller scale. He deals with them on a really big scale. And when those things come up in Hollywood, they can really mess with your head. And it's so important to have friends who, the minute you see them or talk to them, immediately remind you of who you are. And Teddy has always been that guy for me, always. And so for me, if you told me that I could, and by the way, we just happen to also have a great professional relationship as well. That's rare. You can't always have both of those things. But if you told me I had to choose between those two, a personal friendship and a professional relationship, I would choose the personal friendship any day of the week, because it's the thing that really feeds me more than anything. I say all that because I can't say enough about him, because he's my friend. But also, you hear this kind of stuff when you talk to somebody like Kevin Smith. I mean, Kevin and other big name executive people and directors and A-listers in this town, when they work with Teddy, will tell you that Teddy's their favorite executive they've ever worked with, because he's a creator first. He is an artist. He feels, I think, even more comfortable being with writers and directors and artists, because we all speak the same language. And he's the unfortunately rare exec in this town who is really there to help you make your thing the best it can be, not completely separated from how good it needs to be for Netflix or something like that. Of course, that's a consideration for him too, but his drive is to help creators, people like Kevin, make Masters of the Universe, and Rob David and Mattel, make Masters of the Universe, Revelation and Revolution, the best thing that they can be. Just so happens that he's also a lifelong huge He-Man nerd and cares as much about it, if not more, than a lot of people.
And I think that's what's important to remember. You know, we saw the outrage that people had towards it about how, you know, your team, the creative team, weren't fans and stuff like that. And it's the furthest thing from the truth. You know, you've got people like Ted, who is the biggest fan there is when it comes to Masters of the Universe.
Yeah, Rob David.
We got super lucky that, you know, as fans, we're lucky to have somebody in those positions of power that you're talking about who has a deep, lifelong love for this franchise.
Listen, I was a fan before Revelation, but I was nowhere near the fan that Teddy was growing up, because I was, you know, we did that thing when we were kids. I mean, I was a Transformers kid. Transformers and then G.I. Joe were my big number one and number two when I was a kid. He-Man was probably third. And they were just so different that it wasn't something I could really loop together. Whereas there were, like, you know, comics where Transformers and G.I. Joe did things together. So it's like I could play all those things together. It felt weird to have, you know, Prince Adam hanging out with Optimus Prime for me. But when I, you know, as a lifelong fan and a comic book fan and animation fan, like when the 2000 series, 2000X, however we refer to it, when that came out, you know, I was all in because I was so excited that they were the take that they were, the direction they were taking, the POV that they were taking on how to make a new He-Man and the Masters of the Universe show was something I was really excited about. And I also really liked the Four Horsemen sculpted toys, which didn't really catch on as much as I wish they had. They needed better articulation, I think. But you know, then when given the opportunity to come back and work on Revelation, it was like a perfect time for me. I had just left Warner Brothers, where I was on staff working on. I had worked on a 2-part movie adaptation of The Long Halloween, the Batman book,
which is fantastic, by the way.
Yeah,
thank you. Deluxe edition coming out in September. We combined both movies in one thing. Just announced a couple days ago. And I'd done a movie called Superman, Man of Tomorrow, which I wrote that one third, and then it ended up getting released first before Long Halloween. But in the order originally was Long Halloween 1, 2, and then Man of Tomorrow. And I finished Man of Tomorrow, and then I was done at Warner Brothers. And I was like, oh man, what am I doing next? You know, that's kind of the nature of the business that I'm in. What's my next job going to be? I've been very fortunate to get to work on things that may have meant so much to me in my life. I mean, growing up, I've been one of the biggest Batman fans you could imagine. And I got to write this huge adaptation of this huge Batman story and Superman. And what do I do next? And I got a call from War for Cybertron, the Transformers show on Netflix. And I ended my Warner Brothers job on Friday, and I started on War for Cybertron on Monday. So it was wonderful. And then the next thing that came right after that was I got a call about Revelation. So I went right from Superman to Transformers, and then to He-Man in one summer. And it was just like, you know,
that's the dream.
It's just this, you know, little kid Tim would be like, come on, you know, like it's never going to be, you're never going to get to work on all that stuff, you know. I can't believe how fortunate I've been. By the way, the other weird thing that happened is I started working at DC Comics, and I started working on a Shazam book while I was working on Masters of the Universe. And I suddenly was like making jokes online about how I was, you know, like the similarities between Prince Adam and Billy Batson, you know, in terms of how, you know, they call down the power, the lightning, and, you know, it comes down and imbues them with, you know, and they're a kid who, you know, kind of, or young guy who kind of grows into, you know, becomes a man in his prime. And I was like, I can't believe I'm getting the opportunity to explore this concept. At the same time, here I am, 10-year-old Tim inside this grown-up Tim body, just like He-Man. I like to compare myself to He-Man. And I'm experiencing this in my own weird way too. You know, it was a weird summer.
I'll tell you what. Before we start to dig deep into Masters of the Universe, we're hoping that you could just give our listeners and our viewers a little taste about Tim Sheridan outside of Masters of the Universe, like your beginning and personal journey as a creator in the entertainment industry. So starting off as a kid, I thought, like, I grew up in the 80s, and it was an embarrassment of riches if you watched cartoons and read comics in the 80s. And especially, I think in comics was an interesting thing happening, which we were kind of getting away with comics being more adult, and those kinds of stories that didn't talk down to me really inspired me and got me really excited as a kid. I was a voracious reader, and so I didn't want to watch a cartoon or read a comic book and think this is for babies. And then, things like, Dark Knight Returns came out, and it was it's certainly not for babies. And not just in terms of the subject matter, but in terms of like things like violence or swear words or things like that. But the themes that they were exploring were so adult that only an adult could write it, and kids wouldn't understand on, everything that was being said. The thing that I learned in my life as a kid, as a fan of stuff, that I've taken into my work as an adult is kids reach for it. Kids watch and read things in an aspirational way. Like, you want to watch the stuff that your older brother or your older sister's watching, or you want to read the stuff that they're into, or listen to the music that they're into. And I think that reaching and stretching for that stuff is how we grow. And that's how I grew in the 80s as a kid. I reached for things like Dark Knight Returns and Transformers the movie, where my hero, Optimus Prime, died in the beginning of the movie. And I had to figure out, like, that whole movie was about, hey, sometimes the bad guys win. Sometimes the good guys aren't strong enough to win. And that's a big concept for a kid to deal with. But those things just opened my mind to story and possibility. And also, as somebody, I had a huge Transformers collection and G.I. Joe. I did not have a big He-Man collection. He-Man was not my number one. But playing with toys was a way for me to, create stories. I created scenarios and stories, just like many of us did. And I just never really lost my affinity for that. I did get a little lost in the weeds when I went to high school. I didn't understand that being a writer, I just didn't understand that I could live and be a writer. I kind of thought I could be a movie director. That's a job I think is a thing, and then I was in plays on stage, and people told me I was really good. So I was like, oh, well, I guess maybe I'm an actor. And so, like, I went to drama school after high school. I studied theater, and that, happily, that education was completely rooted in story. Like, I wouldn't know anything about how a story is structured if I hadn't gone to drama school. I wouldn't know anything about Aristotle's Poetics, which explained to me the necessary elements of good story, of actual story. And drama. And, I think one of the things I am most proud of, I would say, in the work that I do, is I think I've got a good ear for dialogue. I think I can write like when I sit down to put words to what Orko and Eva Lynn are thinking and feeling, I usually have a pretty easy time of getting into their heads and putting that conversation on the page. And I think
that's because that's what I studied. I learned about drama, which is literally characters talking to each other and telling story in that way, and advancing narrative through that, through talking and conversation and characters understanding each other. So I tend to be more shy about action stuff in scripts. If I will write you the greatest Masters of the Universe episode of two people sitting in a room talking to each other for half an hour, and it will be the least interesting thing you've ever visually looked at, but there'll be some great ideas in there, you know. So that's always the constant challenge for me. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Let me go back and just say, like, so I went to drama school. When I left, I came out to Hollywood, and I was a successless actor for a while, like, because I was a stage actor. Like, I studied Shakespeare, and I came out here and I was like, okay, well, I came to Hollywood to be a Shakespearean actor. Like, that's, if you know anything about Hollywood, that's the dumbest thing anyone could, literally the dumbest thing someone could do. But there was some reason. There was some reason I wanted to be here, and I needed to be here, and I felt I had to be here. And I chased it for a little while. And like I say, I was just totally successless. And finally woke up one day, and I had been telling myself since college that I couldn't be a writer because other people, this is a trick, by the way, that a lot of us play on ourselves, and you can replace the word writer with anything. I would tell myself consciously, I can't be a writer because other people do that so much better. And it was a way, I think, to sort of sabotage any attempt at going down that road in case I failed or something. I guess I was thinking I was going to protect myself. I think a lot of us do that. And something happened that just sort of made me one day say, and this isn't such a nice way to put it, but I just said, you know what? Other people do it better, but there's a lot of people who do it really poorly, and they have really nice houses up in the Hollywood hills. And like, I could be at least as good as those guys, and probably better. Which, the minute I started framing it that way, I saw a path forward. And so what I did was I sat, knowing really nothing about writing a screenplay. I sat down, this is many years ago now, and I had an idea for a story for a half-hour 4-quad, which is what we call like a kids and family, all ages genre show, which it was kind of like supernatural fiction, sort of in the vein of like Doctor Who or something like that. And I wrote a pilot episode for that story, for that series idea. And I gave it to a friend of mine who was working in the business, who had sort of worked his way up in the business. And I said, can you read this? And he was a creative executive. I said, could you give me, I'm not looking for any kind of handout here, or I'm not looking for you to tell me if this is good or not, or I'm not trying to sell it to you. I want the real network notes. What would, if I handed this in to a network, what would the notes look like that I get back? So that I can gauge if I can do this or not. And that friend, who's a wonderful friend, read that script, gave me, in a very caring way, gave me like really solid, real notes. Probably pulled some punches. I don't know now that I look back on it, but still there were some hard hits in there. And it was one of the greatest sort of experiences because I got some confidence and I thought, wow, I think I actually can do this. And short, I mean, I sold an animated series to VH1 right after that, which they never made, like right after that, out of nowhere. Wow. Just because I kind of went in with some confidence. And then that guy hired me, the guy who gave me the notes, hired me to write some webisodes that tied into a series that he was working on. And I wrote those webisodes, and that got the attention of the guy who was the showrunner on that series. And he ended up hiring me to work on a couple of shows he was working on. And that's the way Hollywood works. Like, And it all started with a guy who was a friend of mine who was kind enough to give me the real network notes on a thing that I was writing. And that guy, his name is Teddy Biaselli. He was working at the Hub Network, and he was working on a show called Spooksville that a guy named Jim Krieg was the showrunner on. And he gave me the notes. A little while later, I got hired to work on those webisodes for Spooksville. Later on, Jim Krieg hired me to work on a show called Legend Quest for Netflix and a show called Justice League Action for Warner Brothers in DC. And that was how my career in animation started. Which then there's a lot of other little pieces along the way. That's the really easy, quick, short version of it. And there's a lot of other weird parts to the story too. I mean, but Hollywood is a wild thing. So that's how I came to do what I do. And I've been very fortunate in that I've gotten to work on IP that is stuff that I grew up with, that I have loved my whole life, and gotten to sort of lend my voice to. And I can't believe that I got to work on a Transformers show that was rooted in G1 mythology. And I can't believe that I got to work on a He-Man show that was a love letter in so many ways to the classic era, of Motu, not just, on TV, but the toys and the mini comics. And, we tried to sort of pull from everything we could and distill it into something that we really enjoyed and hope that fans would like to.
Do you have a favorite medium you prefer to work in above all others?
Large. No. I large. I will say, I love what I do. I don't know. It's hard to say a favorite. I like the satisfaction I get when I work on a movie like Long Halloween 1 and 2 and Man of Tomorrow and Reign of the Supermen, because it's just me. I'm a guy who prefers sitting alone in my office in front of a blank screen with a keyboard. And that's a rarity among Hollywood writers. A lot of people really like to get in a room together. And I do love that. I do love part of the process, getting in a room and talking through story together. But when the rubber hits the road is when I'm sitting alone in my office in front of a blank screen. And then my imagination, I just have to open up my imagination and figure things out. But the movie process is so much more isolated. And I like being an isolated loner, working on things sometimes. So I like that. Masters of the Universe and like Transformers. I mean, like we didn't have full on writers' rooms for those shows, but we did have like a shortened version of that where we met a bunch of times. Like on Masters, we met in Kevin's living room, and we sat around in a circle and broke story, on the show based on the story treatment for the season that Kevin had written, in conjunction with the stuff that Teddy and Rob David had, sort of concocted with Kevin. So then we all came in as writers and helped sort of bring all that to life and challenge it, poke holes in it, figure out how to make it better. And, that's kind of the process. That's how it works. When you do that, you like to have a lot of time to do it. Sometimes you don't. In animation, sometimes it's the writing phase is like, hurry up, let's go. And then the production phase lasts 2 years, where they're animating it for 2 years. And then it's like, we really rushed hard to get that thing done. But, the nature of animation is that it's going to take a couple of years before you see it. So, I think about like Long Halloween. I think I wrote Long Halloween 1 in 2017. And it came out last year. Yeah. So several years before it saw the light of day. So, it's a weird business. But I would love to work in live action where I would see the product sooner than waiting for the animation process to be done. And also because I think I do well in live action because I really thrive on writing scenes about, two people sitting in a room talking and coming to terms with things, that's and that's in TV is the money. It's literally the money.
Yeah.
If you can write good, interesting, dramatic scenes between two people in a room that they don't move and they're in a static shot, it's the cheapest thing they can shoot. And so it saves them a lot of money on all the big action scenes they got to do in Act 3, and all. Yeah. So if you can do that in live action, then you're better off. I have not yet made my way over there, so maybe I will.
Before Colt takes us over to Motu, we did see that acting credit on your resume. 2 movies, I think it was.
Oh, well, that was me doing favors for friends back in the day. That's the thing that you do. And the only real acting jobs I ever got paid to do were TV commercials, and you don't get credits for those.
Oh, but would it be anything we know? What's the product?
I mean, probably, maybe, and they're not so big that you'd remember them. They might be, you might be like, oh, I think I remember that. Like I did one for. The first one I ever did, I got cut out of. So it got me into the union, but I didn't end up in the commercial, which was for the guy who went on to direct. He directed the commercial. He went on to Craig Gillespie. He went on to direct Fright Night, the remake, and a movie called Lars and the Real Girl, which was great. And he's the mind behind that show Physical on Apple right now, which is, I think, terrific. And he cast me he got me into the Screen Actors Guild back in the day when I needed to be in that thing. So I did that one. That was for Diet Mountain Dew. I think the second one I ever booked was for Sharpie, I think. Sharpie markers. And it was me and David Beckham. I was in a scene with David Beckham. You couldn't hear us talking. So it was just it had music under it. But I was a guy in the supermarket getting him to sign my orange juice. And then I did a Verizon commercial, and the last one I ever did was for Napa Auto Parts. And it was probably good that it would have been the last one I ever did, even if my writing career wasn't taking off, it would have been the last one I did anyway. Because what they didn't tell me, I booked the commercial, and what they didn't tell me was when I got to set, they had 5 incredibly high-powered air cannons pointed at my face. And they just packed them full of mud and dirt and walnut dust, which is a thing. And the shot was, I was a guy standing with his wife in my yard, and there was a guy doing donuts with his truck in my yard and splattering mud everywhere. And the mud splatters all over us. Well, in order for it to look cool, they had to shoot it out of these 5 high-powered cannons at close range. They hadn't told us that this was happening. They also didn't ask if we had a nut allergy, and they were firing walnut.
Oh, man.
Thankfully, we didn't. So it was like take after take, and then have to go change and shower and come back. And do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And at the end of the commercial, I'm like, all proud. I'm like, get in the pool. Digging a hole for the pool. Anyway, these are my illustrious acting credits.
I gotcha. You got to put these on YouTube.
That's right.
When you look at Hollywood, you also end up doing stuff that are kind of favors for friends. So I did a couple of sort of walk-on things and a couple of little movies back in the day, but I never broke through, never could make it work. I couldn't even make it work in the theater, and I was a theater actor. So, but I have to tell you, I think all of that led me to where I am now, and it pointed me in the direction I was going, and I think that it not only made me a better storyteller, but it made me really tenacious about how the business works, and I could understand how to have a career as a writer. Couldn't understand how actors have careers. And let me say, I love actors, and more power to them. And they are magical creatures to me, not because of what they do to bring a character to life, because I know how that works, right? I studied that. I get that. It's how they are able to have a successful career in Hollywood. To me, that is the actual real magic. It's incredibly difficult, and they are special people for having figured it out.
Wow. Well, I think my wife would be jealous that you got to star in something with David Beckham. person.
I know, he was so nice.
Athlete crush.
He was so nice. Like he was the nicest guy. He was the only guy I knew on set. Like too. Like I'd talk to him between takes and hang out with him because I didn't know anybody else there. I didn't know him before, but he was just so nice that you know, I was blown away. Yeah. By the way,
getting back into the go ahead.
Here's a weird tidbit. We shot that commercial on the WB Ranch, which is literally steps away from where I worked on my first ever animated show, Justice League Action, which Warner Brothers Animation was headquartered there at the Warner Ranch. So when I came to my first meeting on the ranch for animation, I was like, oh my gosh, this is where David Beckham and I were hanging out, you know. Weird.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, when going back to Motu stuff, this is a question that we've talked about, AJ and I, and we'll be asking our guests, this question. But what you talked a little bit about it before, but what is your experience and your personal history with Masters of the Universe?
I mean, like most kids of the 80s, it was inescapable as a it was part of the zeitgeist. I wasn't the kid who, when the mall tour came around with Songster, was like, I have to go, I wasn't that kid because I was focused on Transformers and G.I. Joe. But and the other thing what sucked is like my friends weren't He-Man fans. Like they were all Transformers kids too. So I don't know. It was like one of those things where it just wasn't always. I mean, I watched the Filmation show. Like that was the biggest exposure I had to He-Man as a kid. I watched and loved the Filmation show, and then kind of moved away from it. I mean, as a kid, by the way, the toys, I think I had He-Man. I didn't have Skeletor. I had Beastman. And oh God, I don't even remember as a kid because it was, that wasn't who I was, and when I grew up, it was, when the 2000X show happened, then I was all in. I collected figures, I was, just glued to the TV because I don't know. By then something about it, I grew up with it and it felt like it grew up with me. And I was, I don't know, I was more ready for it. But I think watching the Filmation show as a kid was a really good foundation for going into Revelation, because I think that there's, I don't know, like, are there Motu fans who love the toys and loved them as a kid, but weren't into the show? I don't think so. I think the show was kind of your way in a big way. So
it's hard to imagine a Motu fan that doesn't love that show.
Yeah, and also, and what's great about it is we love it unconditionally, because by any standard, like an animation or production, or Filmation was known for being very thrifty, let's say, in how they made what they made. But we as a kid, you didn't notice it. And as I think, now, if you didn't watch it as a kid, you'd look at it now and go, that's cheap. Why would they do that? And I think I still see past all that. Because that show, more than any show, was about story.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of world building and a lot of charm to it. And actually, as a kid myself, I noticed the repeat animations. I actually look forward to them. I couldn't wait.
That we do. And like I talk about, like I know there are people who grew up on like Power Rangers, who watched Power Rangers because of the Megazord sequence or the Zord sequence, which came in every episode. and it was the same sequence, and they just replayed the same thing. It's like when He-Man, calls down the power. It's you're seeing usually the same thing, and every time it's exciting. Every time.
Well, and it's a little bit of that comfort feeling too. Like it's it's something that you remember as a kid. It has that nostalgia link to it that it also just makes you feel happy and you feel comfortable with it. So I can see why people are drawn to that.
I think the way we achieved that, like, I don't think we did that visually, like where we just repeat the same sequence in Revelation, but it's Bear McCreary's music that takes you there and carries you through, and it feels familiar, and you know what's coming, and then when it's coming, you're excited about it. That guy is a huge Motu fan, and I can't believe we got him to score that show, and he's a wonderful guy and incredibly talented. So, and that the score for that for Revelation is unreal. It's unreal.
I think I forever messed up my Spotify algorithm because I just listened to that score so many times. So now I just get that, and then I get Bear's God of War soundtrack from 2018. That's just what keeps coming up for me.
I remember getting a sneak listen at the transformation sequence, and I was just like, it's goosebumps. You knew that was if nothing else worked, that was going to work. Dun, 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 dun.
It's one of those scores that really elevates the material, and the material is already fantastic. I mean, you're writing the animation, but it's something like Jaws or Predator or Star Wars. I mean, when it's that good, it just notches it up a little bit higher, and it's just
it's like what I was saying about the 2000 show, which is we kind of came at it. First of all, I was a guy who had his marching orders from the producers, which were Teddy and Rob and my direct report, Kevin Smith, and they what we were told to do was, and I'm sure you've heard us talk about this before, was to up the stakes, to make it feel Shakespearean in scope, to because that's how we saw it as a kid. Like when it felt like the stakes were so high when we watched it as kids, and when you watch it as an adult, when you watch a new series as an adult, you have to grow the mythology or at least the characterizations to match that sort of the way you've grown and the way your tastes have grown as an audience. And so that was one of the primary things. But so it was to make you believe it again and love it, and then also to then have fun with it, which is, I have to say, the biggest. Kevin Smith brought so much to the table for this show, things that people will never understand. The amount of work he's put in is more work than any showrunner in animation I think I've ever worked with, in terms of his involvement day to day on the show. One of the big things he was constantly bringing to the show was returning to a sense of fun and adventure, where people like Eric Carrasco and I can get really excited to dig into, to ripping somebody's heart out, and really making them bleed right there on the screen, and advancing their character through suffering. We can go there, and we'll happily go there. To have a Kevin Smith guiding us back to, okay, but let's find the fun in this. Let's remember that one of the things we love about He-Man and Masters of the Universe is the occasional funny gag or joke, which he's terrific at, Kevin. And so, so to sort of temper it and to remind you of the stuff that you grew up with was on the menu for us too. But the guy who was doing all that was monitoring and managing all that is Kevin. and Rob and Teddy too. But Kevin was the guy boots on the ground.
So you're talking about how Kevin Smith was so essential. Is it correct to say that he wrote the story framework in Masters of the Universe Revelation, and then the writers, such as yourself, fleshed it out? Was that the process?
I mean, yeah. So I think that so the way, and I think the way he would say it too, and I think this is true, is that Rob and Teddy came to Kevin and had some ideas about what they would like to see. And then he pitched them, he created a story and pitched it to them. And then they I think worked on that. I think worked on it together, like in terms of talking through it. And then once he had a solid foundation for that, they brought in the writing team, and we all sat with Kevin, and Rob and Teddy were there in the beginning, and Rob was there for the whole process of the writer's room. And we came at it in terms of breaking story, breaking out each of the episodes, which pieces of the story they were talking about made sense for which episode. And I think it was after the first meeting we had where we talked about the broad strokes, and we offered a little bit, I think, of sort of ideas and where we would go with it. I think it was then that Kevin went off and wrote. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think he went off, like we left him in the evening on like a Monday night or something. And then like he went off and wrote a I don't know, 15 to 30 page somewhere, some big document, which broke out the story episode by episode, like in a narrative sort of outline. And he wrote it in a day. He wrote it overnight. Like we had a document to work with the next day. And it was really good. It was so good that as writers, we were like, what is this? What have you done? What kind of magical powers do you have, Kevin, that you were able to do this in like one night? And he's just that. He's just, when he's inspired and full of excitement to work on a thing, it's the next thing he has to do, I think. And I think there's a lot of people like that, and he's a good example of it. And then we all worked on sort of refining that. But that was our North Star through the process, was that document kept bringing us back to where we needed to go, what we needed to do. Then it time to decide who was going to write which episode, because we all worked on like talking through breaking them together. And then it was, Kevin was just like, hey, who wants to write which episode? And, I loved them all. And I could not figure out what to say. And this was only regarding the first 5 episodes at this point, I think. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know. I'll do whichever one nobody else wants to do. And then everybody else chose, and the last one left was episode 4, which ended up being titled Land of the Dead. And I was so relieved, because it's the episode that I'm pretty sure that they chose episodes because like the way they did, because they knew I really wanted to write that one, but I was kind of
You're trying to be polite.
Yeah, but I also would have been happy writing any of them. But there's something about Evelyn for me. There's something about Evelyn that calls to me, and there's something about Orko. These are probably the 2 characters I identify with more than any characters in Masters of the Universe. And I think the Scareglow part of it was scary because he hadn't been depicted on screen before. So there was a little bit of scariness and trepidation for me on that front, but there's also, it's kind of freeing, because there was really nothing to compare it to, so I could sort of do my version of Scareglow. And by the way, when I say my version, I mean the version that we came up with as a team, and then I scripted, but Kevin, got into helping, massage and make into the voice for the show. And then also that Lena Headey Tony Todd and Griffin Newman brought to the table. And I will tell you, I was writing that episode the day that I heard that we got Lena Headey to play Evelyn. And the second I heard that, I went in and erased all the dialogue I had written for Evelyn and rewrote all of it right then on the spot and upped the chewiness of the words, the Shakespearean language of it, because I knew she could handle it. And she is so much more interesting of a character when she speaks with a certain class, but then when she doesn't, when she talks to you on the ground level, it's important. It's more important than when she's maybe talking up here. And so there's just, and I knew from watching things like Game of Thrones, or I first knew her from the Sarah Connor Chronicles. I knew that is an actor who could handle that kind of stuff and could do it and do it way better than I was even writing it. And I've never been happier to be proven exactly right. She just brought everything and more to every word we put on the page for Evelyn. And the same is true for Tony Todd, who I had worked with. He played Darkseid in my Reign of the Supermen movie. Yeah. And he is just Tony Todd. I mean, he's incredible. The whole cast we had was embarrassingly good. And Griffin Newman bringing so much heart and vulnerability to an Orko that we really wanted to bring some heart and vulnerability to, knowing what we were doing with that character, specifically in that episode 4. Spoiler alert.
I think they know
what at the end of that episode, and I'm getting a little teary right now talking about it. and Griffin made you love him and believe in him in a way that when he's saying in the end, look, Lynn, I'm doing it, I'm getting choked up talking about it, because Griffin made you love him and believe in him in a way that Evelyn loves him and believes in him in that moment. So, isn't this stupid?
I want to
these guys.
Oh no! I want to share with you my youngest son has always loved Orko. Has just been drawn to him, and he's 11 years old now. He was 11 when the show aired, and no, he was 10 when the show aired. And when he saw Orko's treatment and just how Orko goes out and how he finds his confidence and his bravery, that was something that my son was specifically struggling with at that time, was being confident in himself, as all kids do. And as a parent trying to find ways to build them up, he found that in Orko, in Revelation specifically. And he was just, it was an amazing moment for him. And so as a father, I want to thank you for those kind of moments, because it was beautiful.
I mean, listen, you thank the whole team and Griffin and Lena and everybody. I mean, that there was so much emotion in that, and we knew what we wanted to. It was going to be hard to pull off because we didn't spend a lot of time with Orko, and because of the nature of the story we were telling about the death of magic and things like that, we felt that it would make sense to go down that road. We knew, and again, more spoilers, we knew what we were ultimately going to do with Orko. But that didn't, our knowledge about that, we didn't let that, taint how we dealt with that moment. And we tried to treat it with as much care as we could for people who do believe in that character and see themselves in that character, like me. And, your son. Like, I think that one of the things from the old classic era that you didn't see in the same way in our show was, were the morals delivered at the end of the episode. Yeah. And those were great. They were done in a certain time when that was something that, was necessary to do and in a show like that. And but that's part of the DNA of Motu, for at least for the people who worked on Revelation, the idea of there being a sort of lesson in the adventures and the things that these characters are going through. And for us, there was a real lesson in Orko's story, particularly in that episode. And then there's a greater lesson that comes into play later. And that we hope that people would take away from it, about believing in yourself and not, and learning how to deal with the voices that made you feel like you couldn't when maybe you could. And then finding strength in surprising places, like from Evil Lynn, which nobody would expect necessarily that Orko would. That stuff is part of, I think, how you tell a Masters of the Universe story. It's what Kevin thinks, I think, about how you tell a Motu story, and we try to always keep that in mind.
Yeah. I could see all the advantages of your team sport writing, all the support and the camaraderie. But is there any disadvantages at all? What happens if there's like a big disagreement in the room? I mean,
look, here's the thing about how writers' rooms work. We're all professionals. Yeah. We do this. There are places where people could act less professional and it could come to fisticuffs, I suppose.
I was suggesting that.
I suppose that can happen, but that's never been in any room I've ever been in, because when you come at something, we talked a little bit about this before we started the recording, when I was talking to you guys earlier today. You guys were very kind to reschedule when we were recording this, and I was just I'm so appreciative that you were able to juggle your schedule to do that, because to accommodate my changing schedule. And you made a comment about how it was, I seemed like it was so nice of me to be so grateful and thankful. And I just feel like that's what, when you're a professional, when you act like a professional, people will treat you like a professional. When you treat other people like professionals, they treat you like one. And I think that's a thing you learn in the writer's room. And so, you disagree all the time on stuff in the room. But one of the rules that I live by, that I learned from my mentors, was twice. You get twice. You pitch it twice. You pitch it the first time, and if it doesn't land, you pitch it a second time. And if it still doesn't land, it's done. And you move on. And because there's always a better idea, there's always a better line. We could sit there forever and write the greatest Masters of the Universe show that ever existed. And it would never make it to the screen, because we'd be spending every day of our lives just in the writer's room writing. And it would be getting better and better and better all the time. But at some point you have to stop and actually make a thing. And that's the disadvantage of, I guess, of anything in entertainment. The purest artistic expression would just never be expressed. It would just be something you're constantly working on for the rest of your life. But so there are, I think, the only disadvantage to the process of creating things in the way that we create them for television is, like, it's a personal stubbornness where it's like, ooh, I wrote a really good line of dialogue, but because they changed the way the scene works, that line of dialogue went away, or this moment that I really loved is gone now and it's not in the show. And then you get frustrated. It can be frustrating when you're a writer and you're not in on the full production process, because you get surprised by that at the end. You see the show and you're like, but wait, what about when he did blank? And it's gone. You know why, and you can tell in the edit why. Let me tell you about the great advantage, though. I've talked a little bit about the advantages, but one of the big advantages, and specifically related to the episode we've been talking about and the moments we've been talking about, is, and I knew Eric Carrasco before going into Masters of the Universe. We were friends and we had worked together before. And in fact, today that we're recording this is Eric Carrasco's birthday, by the way. Happy birthday, Eric.
Happy birthday, Eric.
But he was the one who read my first draft of episode 4 when it had a different title originally that gave away too much.
Fall of the Sparrow, right?
Fall of a Sparrow, which I think told you what was going to happen, I think, to Orko a little bit too clearly. He read it and it was missing something. And he gave a lot of great notes, but the biggest note he gave me that I immediately took, and he was absolutely right, was he said, what this is missing is a little speech, something from Orko to make us love him again. You have to have him give a little speech and something that tells us about who he is and why we should love him. And I said, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't have that in there in the first draft. And it turned into the speech at the Spell Spring, or I think it's outside the Spell Spring, or no, it's right before the Shadow Beasts, and where he talks about, how his real name is Oracle, but he's little, he couldn't pronounce the word Oracle, and Orko was what he could say, and so that stuck. And he talked about his parents, and he talked about his family. He talked about not being good at anything, and how he felt about that, or a little bit. And we actually saw more of how Evelyn felt about what he was saying, maybe, than what he felt about it. But we got what he was feeling through what she was feeling. Anyway, that little speech he gives, it sets up everything, I think, for what you feel about him when he has his moment of triumph in the end. And that was because Eric Carrasco gave me a note and said, hey, you don't forget to put this in. And man, thank goodness for him, because I think the whole Orko's whole story in that episode hinges on that little speech now. It needed it, and he was right.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
In terms of writing, when you're writing for, you've worked with DC, you've worked with these big franchises. When you're working for something like Motu, how do you stick to the rules within that universe, like the canon? Are there any absolute no's that you can't do? Are there must-haves that you have to?
This guy is literally on my desk in reach, not just for this. It's always sitting here, which I carried with me into the first writers' meeting that we had. Because look, let's be frank. There are people, there are fans who probably know better than this, who know everything inside and out, even better than this book.
Yeah.
But I was not one of them. And I knew a lot, but there were going to be things that came up that I was just like, okay, I need to get a quick crash course in what are we talking about right now? Because I don't remember that episode, and I don't remember that comic or that thing. And so first and foremost, having a reference guide like this was very handy for me in the beginning. But the other big advantage we had in the writer's room was that Rob David was in the room with us the whole time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Teddy was there the first meeting we had, and then I think he came back later for other meetings, but he's a big fancy Netflix executive, so he couldn't be there all the time. But he was he was engaged throughout the whole process, but he couldn't sit in the room with us. But Rob made the time to come and sit in the room with us when we broke the story. Now, let me tell you, if you don't know, Rob David is not just the guy who is the, creative soul of Masters of the Universe at Mattel right now, and Mattel Television, but he is also a lifelong fan and a guy who is a creator who wrote Motu comics, and he is a walking Rolodex in the way that Teddy is also a walking Rolodex of what is not only what you need to know to do this, but also, what might be fun. What's a thing that we're not thinking of because we're not thinking of an obscure character that nobody's going to remember that appeared in one thing once or something. And if we do a cameo for that character, that might be a real Easter egg and a fun thing for the fans. Or it could even evolve into something bigger. So he was there as constant creative input and feedback, and then also as sort of those bumpers, the guides for us to know sort of when we were going too far, what felt that's not Motu, that's more Motu, and then that's in the first part of the process. Then when we go through the notes process, Teddy's reading everything, and he's also involved in it as well. And by the way, they're not the only people. I mean, the fans, there are fans at Powerhouse Animation, who produced, who made the thing, who are big fans, who also, can sort of have a lexicon available to them and a glossary and a whole Rolodex of information. So it was kind of like, I just felt safe. We all felt safe the whole time. That we weren't going to do anything that was so wildly outrageously not Masters of the Universe, because that's not like somebody could have come in and said, I want to reinvent Masters of the Universe. Let's come at this from a completely different angle. He-Man's gone. Let's do something else. Like there could have, that happens in Hollywood all the time. That's not who those guys are. That's not who those guys are. Those guys came in and said, this needs to be Masters of the Universe, and it needs to feel like a continuation of a thing that you've loved your whole life, and another piece of the lore. And they were there to constantly to help us with that. It helped that we were all fans in our own right, even if we weren't necessarily the uber fans that Rob and Teddy are. We still came to it with we all had different degrees of love for He-Man. Kevin got a lot of grief for people were talking about like him saying he wasn't a He-Man fan growing up. Like,
right.
He was. Like, the thing is, he was. And like, because he offhandedly said something at one point in a interview, like I'm sure I have said the same thing, because to me, when I think of being a fan, I think of the people like Rob and Teddy who grew up living and sleeping and eating and breathing Masters of the Universe, whereas I was doing that with Transformers. Like if you asked me what I was a fan of as a kid, I'd say Transformers, and then I'd say Batman probably after that. But so I don't know. I think people wanted to throw a gotcha at Kevin, but I know the guy, and he was a fan of. He's a fan of so much pop culture stuff that of things that exist, and certainly in things in the 80s that we all grew up on. And so I can understand level of understanding and excitement about it.
I can understand at Kevin's age too. I mean, I think he was 13 years old when the Filmation show came out. I think he's mentioned before that he initially found it a little corny and a little goofy. He would watch it, but and when you're 13, you're reaching for more at that point, right? More adult fare and content.
But also, how we saw it when we were kids is different than, like, it hasn't left us. Master of the Universe has been with us all these many years. And that's a guy that's at every single Comic-Con, every single pop culture event. He is constantly surrounded by Masters of the Universe, and he knows it. He knows it, and he has a love for it that has, I think, I would say, like all of us, hugely deepened through the process of creating. And that's been wonderful.
And I think that's one of the unfortunate things that I'm happy that you guys are able to endure, is when people try to take things out of context from what was said and try to use them as gotcha moments to prove some type of point.
People, listen, that's the business. Like, we're used to that stuff. Like, people are there. That's what they do though. Like, that's how they make a buck. A lot of these clickbait, website, social media things. I mean, they're doing what they have to do to try to get people to click on their stuff, which is how they make a living. And I would never deny people, their right to make a living. Like, go do what you have to do. I just think as consumers, as fans, it's important for us to know the source and understand the source and what their motivations are. And you're not glom on so quick. I mean, it's easy to sort of glom on real fast, and horde mentality instead of herd mentality. I want horde mentality for you guys. But I think some of that happened. I think some people got it in their heads. They listened to the wrong people in the beginning, and then they went and watched the show, and they're like, "Oh, I like this." They were expecting.
I gave it a chance.
Horrible. And they were like, "Oh, wait, this is good." And what was funny was the number of people who watched. They watched the first. I wish we dropped all 10 episodes at once. There's a lot of people who watched the first 5 and thought, "Wow, this is ridiculous," because now it's, how could you possibly come back from this? And then they watched the back 5 and they thought, well, they listened to our criticisms and they made changes. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I love you, but not how it works. Like, we literally couldn't do that. It was in the can. It was done. Like, it would be too expensive to do that.
We were just talking about this in the previous podcast, where there are people that believe Andra was the new He-Man.
Yeah.
And between the time where episode part 1 dropped and then part 2 launched, that you guys changed the script, you know, reshot or re-recorded the dialogue, and actually made Adam come back as He-Man as damage control. And we're like, are you kidding me?
It's a wonderful, fanciful story, and I encourage those people to become writers, because that's really imaginative, and we could use imaginative people in the business, but that's just not how the process works. It's not possible. Those episodes were all finished. The only thing that after the first 5 dropped, I think the only thing that was remaining on the agenda was they were being localized, which is where they put on like the regional dubbing for different countries' languages and subtitles and stuff like that. Like, that was what wasn't done yet on the back 5 by the time the first 5 were done. So, I mean, look, if you can prove to me that, like, in Sri Lanka, the words on the screen don't match what they're saying because we changed it to make you happy, you know, I would be surprised, because we didn't, but something probably just got lost in translation. But yeah, it's, you know, what are you going to do? Like I said, people got to make a living, and you know, get out there and do it. I just wish that that they would be, you know, that they would admit when they were wrong, and then and then maybe they could find a way to make a living by supporting something instead of trying to drag it down. But hey, you got to do what you got to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Colt.
Yeah. So just real quickly, out of the 3 episodes you wrote episode 4 and you wrote episode 7 and episode 9.
Mm-hmm.
Do you which one of those episodes would you say is your favorite? I know it's like picking a child, your favorite child, but
yeah, I mean, I have no problem answering this question. My favorite is episode 4, but it's because, look, could be a million reasons. It's the first one I did. It's the first time I got to play with the toys in that way. And that's, you know, you never forget your first time. And for me, I felt like a lot of stuff came together. 7 and 9 were a little bit more difficult in terms of the process, because there, like 7, there was a lot of stuff we had to. There was a lot of the way those stories were weaved together in the back 5. There was a lot of kind of going back and forth and figuring out the best way to do the thing. And some of that came late in the process while we were revising the script. And you know, at one point they asked me to turn in a really like wildly short script. And I kept saying, ooh, I don't think we can do all this in that many pages. Like, we have to do a normal set. And their concern was about whether we would be able to have all the action that we needed in that, you know, and it's a proper concern. But that can limit sort of what you do in terms of dialogue. There were a lot of bugs we were ironing out, I think, when we were working more on the back 5. There was no real lull. Like, I mean, we came up with the first 5, and then we came together and figured out the back 5, and it all happened in sequence. But I don't know, maybe there was just something about the way 4 came together for me. And maybe ultimately in the end, it's because I feel like it's the most like a classic Motu story, in that the heroes are off on a quest. They meet a villain who upends the whole thing, separates them, you know, and they have to dig down and learn a lesson about, like, their fear. and overcome that fear in order to solve the thing that they're up against and get to where they need to get to next. And that just felt so much like maybe you can say that that's the story of every one of the episodes, but I feel like that really gelled in that episode for me. And so I love it. And then it's just the Orko and Evelyn of it. Just like I say, getting to play with the toys and getting to put those two toys together, like they are on my shelf right now, getting to put those two toys together and just to see what happens, it was the most fun I think I had on the show at all. Just for let me just put them together and see what happens was what that was all about.
That's and awesome. I love the voiceover you did with Tila, and everyone was conquering their fears, and they go to the satellite shots of everyone else, and that thing just gives me chills. So
when she's using her power, right? She's tapping her power in that moment, and literally the power she doesn't understand, but also her strength, just as being a warrior and who she is and what she's learned fighting at the side of He-Man.
It also, to me, it came across as, it was an important moment for her because it was the point where she finally acknowledged that he was important to her and she still remembered him. She still carried him close to her heart.
Yeah.
That's one of the driving themes of the show.
Yeah. She was denying that because she was still angry with him. And, and it was the first thought for her that I will tell you, originally she came up against not only a spectral He-Man, but she came up against a spectral Man-at-Arms. And then also she came up against spectral Tila as well. And so there was another beat to that. And it was, she was exploring the anger she felt toward Adam and toward Duncan and then also toward herself. And how that anger was birthed out of fear, really. But that's, to me, that's what the idea was. The idea of taking what is on the surface a very classic Motu adventure and then letting it grow up with us as an audience and as storytellers and doing the same kind of adventure, but now the stakes just feel very grown up and then it gets proven out with Orko's sacrifice, where it's just, the worst possible consequence happens, which we would have never seen in any previous incarnation of Masters of the Universe.
So I know your strength or your love is to write dialogue, but in the next episode, that amazing Skeletor versus Savage He-Man fight, how much of that epic fight was scripted versus just positioned as fighty fight and handled by the directors and Powerhouse?
Okay, so here's where you're going to learn a little something about me and the fighty fight thing, which is everybody got really happy when I came in. I think arguably I probably had the most experience as an animation writer. Like everybody else had like incredible resumes behind them of tons of amazing things, but I think I had written more animation than everybody else at that point. And they were like, oh wow, Powerhouse says we don't need to choreograph the fights. We can just write when a fight's going to happen. We can just write fighty fight into the script, and then that saves us from having to choreograph it, because ultimately, and this is the way it works in animation, is ultimately the story artists will come in and they could just throw out the choreography you do and come up with something way better, and they often do, by the way. But for me, I just know from experience that if you just write fighty fight, it's going to change your page count for your script, because now all the stuff that needs to be described and explained in the script, for a fight is not there. And also the big problem, and I told everybody this in the beginning, I was like, the biggest problem we're going to have is that you end up with these beautiful fights that are like kind of anime fights where everybody's fighting and nobody's saying anything. And it's cool, but it also feels a little jarring because there's no advancement of the narrative through dialogue happening. And so I kind of fought against the idea of just writing in fighty fight. So if you look at my scripts, like I'll write in fighty fight, and then I will also choreograph stuff, and my excuse was, well, I need to write in this choreography because I need to explain this line of dialogue I'm putting in for the middle of the fight. Then this line of dialogue that they reply with, and then this, So I kind of fought that a little bit. Happily, to go back to your question though, how much of that incredible Skelegod Savage He-Man fight was scripted by me? Probably zero. Like I think I scripted stuff, and if I pull up the script, you'd look at it, you'd be like, yeah, this isn't exactly what happens. What's on this page, what happens is like a million times cooler, because that's what the story artists and the directors like Patrick and Adam, bring to the table. They're so visual and so good at this. They've been doing this for a long time. And so they saved my butt. But the good news is that a lot of that dialogue I wrote for the middle of the fight gets in and gets recorded at least. And then you can see if we need it to be able to advance the story. So I would say probably very little of it is word for word what I wrote, but the basic concept of the fight is what Thank God, because you wouldn't want to see depicted the thing that I wrote. Like it's, oh yeah, that's all they do. Like, okay, fine,
You're probably selling yourself short. But,
I'm the worst. Like I will betray the whole thing for, my pages are running long. I'm going to cut this incredibly cool, interesting part of the fight out because I would rather have this monologue from this explaining what they're feeling in this moment.
What did Kevin call it? Monologues of the universe, I think.
Monologues of the universe. Hey, listen, like I said, we grew up.
Yeah, I loved it.
With everybody. Yeah.
All right, then how about with your script, Pig Boy? I believe he only appeared in the episodes that you wrote. So was this fantastic inclusion your idea?
Yeah, so I tried to get Songster in.
Songster.
Tried. I think my first draft of 9 had Songster in it.
Oh no.
And that was there was some concern, I think, about whether not only if we could even use him, which I think there was sort of a clearance question, like who really owns him? I don't know. That's always a question with Masters of the Universe stuff, which is why, the whole thing with She-Ra is such a complicated thing. I don't know. I mean, I think there was a question, but I don't know that we really necessarily set out to answer the question. I think it more came down to a matter of, is he really the best? Like, it's kind of like we're just stopping to do sort of a real in-joke for a few nerds right here. And I think that was probably, and I'm willing to bet that came from Rob, that note, because he's really good at those notes where it's like, love this. And I'm totally with you, but I feel like maybe we're speaking to an audience of 3 people, and we probably ought to give something that more people can get excited about. And so honestly, like it was probably Teddy Biaselli, who I talk to all the time, and I think he probably said, what about Goatman and Pig Boy? Okay. I'm willing to bet it was him who suggested Goatman and Pig Boy. Either that or I said it and he, but I remember talking to Teddy about it. Either way, he was enthusiastic about Goatman and Pig Boy, who ended up being voiced by none other than Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wish Webstore was in your episodes too, and he's my favorite vintage figure. I just wish he had a voice, but he had no line of dialogue.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe someday.
So you talked a little bit about, when things get cut out or left on the editing floor. Is there anything that you wrote that got cut that you wanted to stay in? Like, obviously, I think you probably wanted it all to stay in.
Absolutely is. And I can't tell you what it is.
Oh, does that mean we get a secret revolution?
I can't tell you what it is because it relates to certain plot lines in Revolution now.
All right, fine.
But there were scenes that were at the beginning of episode 9 that just really delved into some stuff. Talk about two people in a room coming to terms with things. And we had to cut those because we streamlined the way the story was working, and those scenes needed to go so we could sort of beef up some of the later stuff. And then, but happily those themes and ideas will make a return.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm sorry that I can't tell you.
No, that's okay.
I think
it wasn't about Beastman liking dominant women, was it?
Well, let's see. Let me tell you that that is something I can talk about, which was I did that. That was in episode 4.
Mm-hmm.
Like I started that, and Beast Boy. I've been working on Teen Titans. Beastman. The concept that we were pushing, I think this was something Eric Carrasco and I kind of cooked up at one point, was that he was somebody who would default to the strongest female voice in the room and follow that voice as his leader. and sort of not necessarily being dominated necessarily, right? But that was sort of just his. And maybe it was cultural, but it was that a matriarch was something that, was his default to sort of, and it made fun out of his relationship with Evelyn, and in episode 4, it made a little fun with him and Andra. Ultimately, I'm so glad it came out, because what we got to in the back 5 in terms of the development and the relationship between Beastman and Evelyn, kind of for me rivals the Orko Evelyn relationship. I mean, it's some really interesting, solid stuff from everybody on the team, and it didn't take up a lot of space in the show, but the couple of scenes that they have together are just, I think, really impactful, and they make you, Kevin Michael Richardson's unreal as an actor, and he just makes you feel so many things for Beastman, and ties right into the way that the way that Orko sees something in Evelyn, something that not everybody's born evil, right? Or nobody's born evil, really, is what he's saying. Nobody's born evil. Beastman sees something in her too. Still, he sees. The difference is Beastman sees someone who is strong but who has been victimized, and lives with, has a sort of skewed mentality about who she is based on what she perceives as her victimization. And that's what she perceived with Orko. She sees Orko that way, that he was victimized by his family and that he doesn't see the real strength that he has because of that. So it takes Beastman to kind of help bring that out in Evelyn. I Am My Own, is an important thing that they share, by the end of the show.
Yeah. Okay. So, with that episode with, Orko facing off against Scareglow and ultimately, holding off Scareglow, he has that great line where he tells him to go back to the shadows. And I think we all saw the Tolkien influence there from Lord of the Rings.
I didn't write.
Were there any other, I guess, literary sources that you took inspiration from?
I wish I'd written that line into the script. That was dropped in by our brilliant directors, who are huge Lord of the Rings nerds, and it was so evocative and it connected you to the feeling you felt in Lord of the Rings when you heard that line, and that's exactly the feeling you needed to connect to. So it was super smart on their part. But in terms of literary sources, this is it right here. I really just stayed focused on the literature of Masters of the Universe, the lore and the literature of Motu. In terms of the way I wrote you probably heard Kevin talk about this, but the way I wrote Scareglow's dialogue in episode 4 was in randomly alternating capitalization and lowercase letters, everything he said, so that it looked ethereal and ghostly on the page. It just didn't look right. Well, that's something I ripped off from the way that the Mad Hatter's dialogue is written in Batman comics, specifically in The Long Halloween, which I had just adapted. So it was very fresh in my mind, and it was so on the page in comics, it was so interesting. And you heard a sing-songy weird voice coming out of him when you saw this weird version of how the letters were organized. And I thought, for the purposes of the script and reading the script, the audience is never going to see that. But the people who need to read the script through the process will see that, and it will give them an idea of what I think the sound of Scareglow is. And so, it's not like delving into themes of, classic literature, but it is me ripping off from Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale one more time, and taking something that I thought was so worked so well when I saw it in Long Halloween, and then putting it in the script for this, which Kevin happily, it was something he really loved so much that he remembers it and has talked about it a couple of times about how it how he thinks about now, probably how he can rip that off and use it at some point. He knew it from Hatter too, and so he recognized it when he saw it. But yeah, that episode, there's something about that episode, all the voices and everything, like it all came out so much like what I heard in my head, that it's scary.
Wow.
By the way, can I just tell you, I've worked on a lot of other shows since Masters of the Universe. I have recently done some more work on Masters of the Universe, but
what was that?
The recall that I have for these episodes and the stuff we're talking about, even just down to lines of dialogue and moments and things, is not like me. I'm normally, when I've moved on to another project, I kind of have to clear out some stuff and make room for the new thing. And it shows you what a big, important thing Revelation has been in my life. The fact that it's just always with me. Like I carry all of those beats and those moments with me, and those lines and that stuff, and the stuff in the other guys' scripts that just boggles my mind. I mean, Dia Mishra wrote some stuff that I just, coveted. I wish that I could write like that. And Eric Carrasco was always, he's always been, the moment I met Eric Carrasco, I was in a room and he started talking about the thing that we were working on. And I left that meeting and I turned to a friend of mine and I said, we're all going to be working for that guy one day. Yeah. And by the way, it turned out true. Eric hired me to work, to do some work on a show he was working on. But I still think, if I'm lucky, I'll work for Eric one of them again. But I see the stuff that those guys did, and I'll never forget it. I think there's some really good stuff in Revelation, and for me, it's sort of like when you remember school. You remember the good stuff. You remember those great times of your life that you're gonna remember forever. There's sometimes when the lightning strikes and everything is in line, and it's the celestial apex of shows I've worked on. And yeah, I'm just going to always carry it with me.
I'm going to test your recall now with a few things.
Now I was such a idiot that I set that up. Now I'm going to nothing.
That was our gotcha question.
No, you're going to be fine. But, and this involves Kevin Smith, because I was hoping you could delve more into your concept of sorcery versus magic. And it was during your Land of the Dead episode commentary with Kevin Smith, and you're beginning to explain how the concept fascinated you. Then Kevin Smith jumped to another topic, and I was like shouting at my screen, "No, go back! I want to hear Tim elaborate." So, can you elaborate more on this concept of sorcery versus magic?
Absolutely. So, so this is great that I set up for you that I went to drama school, because there was I did 4 years of drama school, and at the end of it, I felt very accomplished. Excuse me. I felt very accomplished, and I, learned a lot of stuff. I worked on a project with another actor who's a very good friend of mine, and who's a real genius. I mean, this guy is the real deal. Like, he's a really great actor. And somebody commented on, like, we both auditioned for the same part, and I auditioned, or my audition versus his audition. And I heard one of the professors in college say, the other guy, John, the other guy's name, John and Tim, they said, Tim, they're both great auditions. Tim is the magician, but John has the magic. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. The distinction between those things are, what he wasn't saying was the difference between magic and sorcery. That the like real magic versus, tricks and the facade and the and that stuck with me for many years, and I'd never really gotten to explore it. The concept of, that sorcery could be perceived as simple, cheap magic, or that simple, cheap magic could be perceived as sorcery. And so Eva Lynn's little speech there is, was about talking about her. It was revealing, her deep love of being who she is deep down, even though she's been through hell and back. And what she was trying to sort of teach Orko in that moment is, that you're special, we're special, and we can love that we have this special thing about us, and we can still marvel about it. That's what it's to them. They look at it and it's sorcery. It's academic to other people, but you and I could still look at it with the wonder that we've always sort of looked at it, and see it for the spectacle that it is, and that it's magic, and because of how it makes us feel, because we do it. I think that was what I was trying to go for, was the idea that sorcery, magic is one thing, but a magician, can make you love magic. There's an extra layer of something that they can bring to it. And so I guess what I was really talking about was the difference between science and art. Like, everybody else would see what they do as science, and she sees it as art. And that's what she's hoping that she can inspire Orko to see in it, instead of seeing it as boxes that he has to check, because I'm a failure because I can't make this thing happen or these things happen. And I think what she's saying is, it's, a little bit like what I was saying to you about, we could create the greatest Motu story ever in a room if we just were left alone and never had to actually put it on the screen. You can love the creation and the magic of creation, and not just get hung up on the momentary failures of execution, which is what Orko's hung up on in that moment.
Well, and ultimately that theme plays through to the end when, that's what pulls Eva Lynn back from the brink, and she sees the magic again in the universe.
That's it. And that's
lovely.
That's the thing that I think that I don't know how much we talked about it the first time around. I think it was probably more like it was a line. The way it probably worked was it was a line that I threw in, which I thought sounded cool and was exploring a thing that I'd always been interested in. And then when we got together for the second round and talked about the next episodes, I think that concept was something that fueled how the resolution was going to happen. Although I don't really remember talking too much about it back then, but that's also Kevin Smith for you. Like Kevin was there through every step. And I think there are a lot of things that get called back in that show that only happened because he called them back, because he remembered them. And he's got a memory like a steel trap. I mean, he doesn't write down notes, which is shocking to me. He remembers everything. So he would, kind of remember to thread some things back in. And, it's good, which is what makes great story and great television. And I'm so happy that that's where we came to with her, was that she got to see the magic of the universe and not the celestial apex. Up until that point, all that stuff was very much science, and she was not, it was the sorcery, the Darkland, or the Godland, we called her back then. I think the Darkland is what we ended up with. She had forgotten to see the magic.
Yeah. I got the impression it was like, what can I say? Like an animal, right? That dies in a forest and starts decomposing. And you look at the horror of it all. But then when you stand back and look to see that, this is nature, that it's feeding, the grass, it's becoming fertilizer. It's giving life.
Isn't it funny? You're looking at death and thinking death, but in fact, you're looking at life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the way I took that. And I don't know.
That was Eric Carrasco and Kevin Smith bringing things around there in the finale. I think that was, I wish I could take credit for that stuff, but those guys are geniuses.
Wow. All right. So let's talk then Dark Lynn's vision. I mean, the death of God. We got the ram, we got the snake, we got the falcon. So can you explain more of that religious imagery we saw and its meanings?
I could stumble through trying to explain it to you. Happily, this was not my episode. So Eric, did a great job of realizing those moments and putting them. I think, well, actually, was it my episode? Because I think
so. I think it was in the beginning.
I didn't write it. We moved that into the end of my episode, I think. Episode 9, right?
Yeah.
But it was originally in episode 10.
So
that beat was something that Eric Carrasco wrote. And so that was, but it was based on a document, I believe, Teddy Biaselli. He'll be so mad at me for saying this, but I believe Teddy wrote up a document about religion in Eternia and sort of, the symbols and the symbolism and what's sort of what our baseline was going to be for how we dealt with, magic and sort of the religion that sort of that lived around it, or the religions that sprung up around it. And so he was taking from that, I think, as a source, and made some beautiful stuff that they ended up, that I get to take credit for because they moved it into my episode. How did my episode end? My episode it was just the, I think it still ends on the cliffhanger of Scareglow being resurrected, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that was, we hadn't gotten to that particular other imagery yet.
I assume they were religious deities or something.
That vision, I think, maybe they're going to be mad at me if I'm not supposed to reveal this. But
okay.
The way it plays out in the episode is that it's Darkland's vision, right?
Yes.
I don't think it was written that way. I think it was written as Tila's vision when she's in the Tide of Transformation. I think it's part of her. I think. By the way, I could absolutely be wrong. I don't remember Eric's episode the original script for Eric's episode. I don't remember it as well as I would like to.
I'm sorry, we're testing your recall. I'm sorry.
It could have been Evelyn. It could have been Darklynn's vision in episode 10, but something tells me it was Tila's, and we ended up shifting it and gave it to Darklyn. But I don't know. What did you think? Did you think it worked the way it played out?
I think so. I wasn't sure at first what I was looking at, but I kind of tried to imagine that these were separate deities, separate symbols of religion that represented the death of God. And again,
a different kind of magic, right?
Yeah. And I don't know, I just thought it was fascinating. I would love if there's a doctrine, I would love to read it, I was actually hoping it would come out in the art book, but
no, there's all kinds of neat stuff floating around that maybe someday they'll put in a big omnibus. Awesome. I'd love for them to publish I always would love if they would publish the original drafts of the scripts, so you can see just how wild and different things maybe were in certain situations. I mean, there's a whole plot line in episode 7 that we had to jettison. There's actually a couple. There's a couple of things that we had to get rid of, but I'd love it if people had an interest in those things and would love to see them combined, and if
that'd be great.
A book, publish a book with all that stuff.
All right, well, let's see if you remember this. You had mentioned in that same Land of the Dead commentary that Orko's death was originally written as gory. So can we describe what we missed?
I mean,
what happened? What'd you do to Orko?
Just pull it up, and since we're testing my recall, I'm going to completely cheat and go back to the script. Oh, you know what? This is the original draft. Yeah, I don't have the original draft in front of me, but I think, I don't know, maybe gory is very strong a word. But gore, I don't know. I mean, like, the idea wasn't that it was blood and guts so much as it was very final. It was clear that he was physically torn apart.
Poor Griffin.
And so that was what I wrote. I mean, I wrote it to be like, I didn't want there to be any question when I wrote it. My version was, I want everybody to say he is dead. There's no coming back from this. And I can get really focused on things like that to the point where they probably sat around in the edit and were like, but why? Because and so now we just have to explain how he was ripped apart and get so I think probably they made the right choice. Yeah. But yeah, that was I think I just got really I really wanted to live with the fake out on that. I really, because it wasn't that it was a fake out, it was that I just wanted there to be no question, so that we could all experience the feeling of he's really gone. And not go, wait. It's like that thing. You watch movies all the time where you're like, oh, but so-and-so's dead, and then it'll turn to the other and be like, yeah, but we didn't see the body. And once you realize that, you're like, oh, they're coming back. And then they come back.
I do that all the time.
Yeah.
Where's the body?
See the body. And then sometimes, like in Doctor Strange, it's like, well, we saw the body and he still came back. That's a tough needle thread. So.
Well, moving past the...
When I say gory, what I wanted was gut-wrenching screams, entrails spilling out of it.
A Mortal Kombat fatality.
Yeah. Finish him. That's what it should be.
Just imagine Colt's son now. After that.
He might be in counseling. Well, yeah. So I guess, kind of dealing more with these ideas of how things work within Eternia and within the mythos of Masters of the Universe. With Savage He-Man, when Adam calls down the power without his sword.
Yes.
Is there I guess how does that work? What was the conversation about that? Because it's amazing, and let me preface that a little bit more. I mean, there has been precedent of him being able to do this within the comics. It's kind of one of those elements of who Adam is.
That was the thing we felt was important. First of all, Savage He-Man started, because we were excited to play with all the toys, and we were really interested in like the original designs for He-Man and how we could sort of get that in this idea of this hulking, all power, mindless version of He-Man, and what would that be? And that was the thing that we talked about from the very beginning, and that stayed in through some things came and went, but that was something we knew we wanted to kind of play with. And so the actual, and I don't remember how we thought of it in the room, but the idea of calling down the power without the sword, we thought that's going to be not only like, we knew as fanboys that we were like, and girls, that we were like, that's going to be a badass moment. Like, just to be able to see that happen, and or like the beginning of it happening, it's going to be like, wait, what? No, they're not going to, right? And then to be able to give you something weird that's the result of that, we knew that would be fun because we were having fun with it. The concept, that it just so happened to be something that thematically fit with things that we were trying to play with, which is this idea that the key wasn't really the sword anymore, that it was Adam himself, and that his connection to the power had grown so strong that it would bend to his will in that way and terrify Skeletor, Skelegod, because of that. Because he doesn't know how he did it and has to know. because the whole concept was, look, we were really excited and interested in the idea of the fabulous secrets, the secrets of Castle Grayskull and fabulous secret powers, and like that stuff that really interested us. So this seemed like a real secret power that he had, and something that, here's Skelegod thinking he has learned all the secrets of Grayskull, and then one more suddenly shows up. It's irresistible to him. It's catnip. So I feel like Adam, even if he knew what was going to happen when he called it down, would have still done it, because it's one thing that would shut down Skeletor in that moment. His insatiable lust for to learn every last secret, to be the master of the universe,
Yeah.
So that's all those things were kind of things we were talking about in the room, and we decided. I mean, I think originally Savage He-Man was, originally going to be even bigger. He was going to be in the show a little bit more. I think he might have been originally slated to be in a couple of episodes, if not more. But as the story sort of shaped up, it made sense to really have him turn at the end of 6 and explore that in 7 and let that go in 7 as well when he sees his dad.
So this was less tied to Adam and just another secret of Castle Grayskull, where previous champions could do the same thing. If
we didn't really talk about that, and so I can't definitively say one way or the other if this is something that other champions can do or not. I think the way we talked about it was that this is something that is, in this circumstance, the way it's happening is uniquely Adam, and I don't know if that's because of who he is inside, or if it's because he if it's I don't know if it's a power that's been available to all the champions and it's uniquely Adam here because of the reason he's doing it and the way he's employing it. I mean, that could be too. I don't have the answer to that, and I wouldn't feel like it's my place to say what the answer to that is. My opinion on it is simply that, and I think the way we talked about it in the room was that this is one of the reasons why Adam is special. There's something special about him. And I mean, there's a lot of things that are special about him, I think. But it's when he's got one more trick up his sleeve and, nobody really knew. And maybe he didn't, in that moment, it sounds like he doesn't even know. He says, I've always wondered what would happen, if I called it down without the sword. So, in our universe, he hadn't done it yet. He could very well be playing around. He could know what it is that's going to happen.
You guys did kind of shine the light on him as he was special in regards to him being on Preternia, and he was the only one that chose his lesser form. And he felt like he was,
he chose his form because he thought that was his greater form. That's an interesting, his lesser form.
Yeah, lessers is always in quotations.
I mean, for him, in that situation, which is interesting, it's to him that's his greater form.
But that moment right there in that episode, it felt like he was unique among all the previous champions. So
yeah. Oh, so the end of episode 4 originally had when they meet Adam in Preternia, there was a lot more stuff that happened after Orko died and before they ran into Adam. And the way they ran into Adam in the original version of the story was, it was a little bit more action-packed, and they thought he was, somebody else, and he and Tila get into a scuffle. And it's in this moment of the light comes, shines in, and she realizes who she's, tussling with. Adam.
Oh, that would have been amazing.
But there was a couple of scenes that led even before that kind of explained some Preternia stuff and everything. But it stopped the episode dead. Like the Orko thing was so climactic that we kind of right there at that point you're on a collision course with the end of the episode, and to sort of have another scene to explain now what's happening in Preternia. And then now we're going to have this adventurous thing where this fight happens. And then, oh, look who it is. It's a big twist. It's Adam. It didn't get us anything except feeling like the show was going on a little long, like when the exciting thing already happened, It also gave us the opportunity to end that episode on a real downer bummer note from Bear McCreary, who was playing the theme, as a fugue to Orko, as a memorial, which was, if I wasn't crying already at that point, my God.
So you can you give us any more insight on Scareglow, the shadow of a ruler, now ruler of shadows?
Yeah. So look, that's a response to Tila saying Skeletor, and he's like, not quite.
Yeah.
And that's because I'm being a nerd, and I'm like, I want to play with the idea that maybe he is the evil ghost of Skeletor from like he's a future ghost of Skeletor.
Oh.
Like that was what I was kind of originally playing with. That was something we did not go with, but I think the line still made sense and still stood as its own thing. The shadow of a ruler, now ruler of shadows, and this something place. I don't know, Forsaken, or I don't know. But yeah, that because I also love the idea that he was once a great ruler, perhaps.
Yeah.
Who knows what he was? I like the idea that there's backstory that we don't know, and that gives an opportunity for us to explore in future stuff. I mean, that's why I love doing the Revelation comics so much, because it's just got the ability to go in and play with the toys in a new way and talk about some flashbacks and lore stuff and do a big sort of something that can really, something that will really divide the fandom in terms of the Skeletor backstory. But he's Skeletor, so the end of that episode, the end of that issue is is he telling the truth or not?
I'll tell you what, we'll put a pin in that and get there in 1 second. But and we're going to close out this podcast with those comics. But one more question: you were going to show Orko's face? Any ideas?
Oh, I think that was something. I wasn't something. I think I was. I mean, I was around when we talked about it, but it wasn't something I was pushing for. Although I say that, and then if you cut to Arrested Development, like video of me, he did like, yeah, let's show his face, in the room, which I very possibly could have done, but swept up in the moment.
I think it was supposed to happen in your episode, though. So,
yeah, I didn't write that in.
Okay.
And I think because originally that was something we talked about earlier than when I actually went to script. But that was a conversation I think that was happening with the directors and with Kevin more than it was happening with the writers, because it was a visual thing, and it didn't necessarily have any bearing on what I was doing with my part of the story.
Okay.
I like not showing it though. I think that Kevin's right when he talks about it. I think he says like, kind of would have been a letdown. Like no matter how you did it, it kind of would have felt like a little goofy.
Yeah.
Maybe. I think he said that. Maybe I'm wrong, but and so I tend to kind of agree with. I tend to just agree with Kevin anyway, not because he was my boss, but because he's usually right about these things.
They also had plans to reveal his face in Filmation as well, but that never happened. So
right.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's what we were referencing. I mean, I'm sure that was the idea was, if there was something that was sitting out there that was unturned, the stone that unturned with Orko, that maybe we should do it. I think we did sometimes talk about stuff like that, about like something that might be hanging out there. I mean, the big one obviously is Teela's, origin and who she is, and that was something that we saw in classic He-Man, and that motivated a lot of the first half, certainly of Revelation, and ultimately the ending as well.
Yeah, that's why me and Colt couldn't figure out all the criticisms of so many people saying Teela is going to be He-Man, and we're like, don't you know the Filmation? Don't you know her lineage? I mean, they're setting this up.
Like her He-Man.
And then they knew they were wrong. They got told, and so they were like, no, Andra.
Right.
Andra had a different name originally, and we were told we couldn't use that name. And then she was a different character originally in the very beginning. And then I said, I want to go search through the lore and see if there's a sort of character out there that we could bring to life and visit and learn more about, and somebody who people wouldn't be too pissed off about because there wasn't a ton of lore surrounding them. And we came up with Lieutenant Andra. And once we did that, once we started thinking about who she was and who she could be in this show, then that just opened up a whole lot of stuff. And that character became one that we really all gravitated toward. She was very much like the companion in Doctor Who is your way in to the story of this wild story that's happening with this wild central character. But that companion character is like you, who's kind of like from the outside, who's seeing all this for the first time. And you can't help but sort of feel a camaraderie with a character like that. And then Tiffany Smith came in, and she's so good. And she's such a wonderful human being. She's such a wonderful person. And she did such a great job bringing that character to life. I'm so happy that she got to do it. And what a feather in her cap too, like a real iconic Motu character. She's originated in animation and on screen, you know, kind of the way Tony Todd has gotten to do with Scareglow.
Yeah. And she got her own action figure, which is got to be cool.
Action figure.
It's fantastic.
Tony's had some action figures before, though. I could never hear anybody else now but Tony Todd as Scareglow. I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to hear somebody else do it.
I remember as soon as that announcement was made, I was overjoyed that it was Candyman that was going to be Scareglow.
And he's
it's like, yeah, that makes sense. That's perfect.
You know his voice when you know Tony Todd, but he's got such incredible range within the voice that is Tony Todd that it's its own thing. Scareglow has his own sound. Yeah.
Tell me you got the book of Scareglow, Tim. The exclusive Scareglow figure toy.
Yeah. I didn't get it.
Oh no.
And here's where it pays to know people. I emailed someone at Mattel, and I said, I do not want any special treatment. I am happy to pay for this figure. I just missed the window. This was from my episode. Is there any way that I can, you know? And so wonderful of them. They were like, we think we got one. And they sent me one.
Ah, awesome.
Which is, you know, just so stand up and wonderful of them.
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy. They sent me a few things when we started, which were great.
Okay, so
we talked about my origin story. What I left out 10 years of my life working as a hired gun host, well, in person for events for Mattel. I worked 2 years for Mattel at Toy Fair and at Comic-Con and other things where I would I worked mostly for Mattel games, and I would like demo the new games that were coming out and play them with people. And it was a job that paid my rent while I was in the writer wilderness. And 10 years I did that. And then I got to come back and write for Masters of the Universe, which is just, you know, what a ridiculous footnote in my life. You know?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now we needed to go full circle. You need to do a Masters of the Universe commercial.
There you go.
Kevin and Jay did one. Did you see the one they did?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Hilarious.
Hilarious. It is so funny. It's so funny. I wish it was on TV. Like, it was so good.
Oh, it's on YouTube, but it's great. Yeah.
I wish that it had been blanketing the airwaves because people would have just fallen in love with those guys all over again because of that. It was so funny.
Yeah.
All right, so finally, we can't close out this podcast series without discussing the wonderful Prequel comic series. So, you know, what's contained in these 4 comics? Was it always meant to be told in comic form, or was some of these concepts and story beats originally intended for the Netflix series?
No, I mean, look, that came later after the show was well into production, and Kevin and Rob called me and asked and I had just started working in comics for the first time. Like, literally, I think it might have been, I had been doing some stuff with DC and none of my comics were on shelves yet. I was working on stories for DC, and they called and I don't even think they knew that. I was like, oh, you know, I'm doing comics with DC right now. They were like, oh, well, do you want to work with us on this? And we've got an idea for story, and we'll write out a story treatment, and then, you know, if you'll go off and script it for Dark Horse and our artist, that would be good. So I was like, absolutely, are you kidding? I would love to, because I knew what they wanted to do. What they wanted to do was do 4 issues each from the perspective of a different main character in Revelation. And that would sort of help kind of, give a little bit more to their backstory or their motivations or what was happening, things that were happening in the show. So it was directly connected to what was happening in the series. And since I knew what was happening in the series, it would be easier to go to me than to go to anybody else. So I was very happy they asked me to do it. Kevin could have written these himself, by the way, but he is incredibly generous and offered for me to do it. So we did that together. And Mindy Lee was an incredible artist who I actually know from animation too. She does a lot of work in animation. We worked just really well together. She was so good on this. I love her stuff, and it's a very unique style that is not the style of the show, but it's not anything you've seen before from Masters of the Universe. So it's really visually uniquely its own. Which
it has such a liveliness to the way she draws the characters and stuff. It really, it evokes something that I haven't often seen in classic Masters of the Universe art styles.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. Good. It's a very interesting perspective. I mean, it's not, you're not looking at very realistic, like Alex Ross type of, you like could be live action sort of things. You're not looking at Filmation or even Revelation. You're seeing Mindy bringing her artistic flair and style to her interpretation of these iconic characters. I mean, her Skeletor is terrifying, I think. Yeah. So anyway, it was a great, wonderful experience, especially, I would say, you asked about the connection to Revelation. I mean, it was always going to be very deeply rooted in Revelation, but I think one of the reasons they came to me was because they knew that they wanted to involve the story to some level of the Orlax of Primaria, which is one of those things that I went nutty about in the writing process on the series, where I was like, okay, I'm writing episode 9 and I'm going to depict the Grayskull dungeon. And I don't think these creatures that we know and have seen in the Grayskull dungeon for all of our lives, I don't think all of them have been identified. They don't all have names, and I love naming stuff. So and there's no getting around that giant tentacle. And so I said, I don't know. I came up with this sort of what really kind of sounded like a title, which is the Orlax of Primaria, which sounded so regal and interesting for a fleshy tentacle. And there was something that inspired Kevin and Rob in that, and they wanted to sort of base the comic in some ways around the story of the Orlax. The Orlax is the narrator of the comics when you hear a narrator's voice, and it's a really, like, I tried to do this really heightened comic book language that we haven't seen for a long time, because this very haughty, beautifully succinct even uber Shakespearean level of speech, because of the irony of that the Orlax can't actually communicate verbally with us, but that these are, in comics, we can show you what he's thinking and saying without actually having to like dub it or do something dumb that we would do in animation.
Yeah,
it's one of those unique things that comics let you do that you couldn't do on screen, I think, believably in a satisfying way. And so the irony of him being this incredible speaker, who will never be able to really speak, was really attractive to me. And it's ultimately a very simple story. The idea is the Orlax came to warn us about the revelation, about the celestial apex, about what's coming, because in his dimension he's already experienced it or can see it at least. And but the drama, the tragedy is when he gets here, he can't tell us this is coming for you, and we mistake his attempts at trying to help us as attacks, and he gets attacked and used, and his powers are unfortunately poisonous to us, but they're normal to him, and so they still do. You really think he's a danger, so you lock him up in the dungeon.
Isn't also part of the tragedy that he kind of caused the events? I got this whole Terminator mind-bending thing where, I mean, it was because of the Orlax that Skeletor learned about the secrets of Castle Grayskull, and it was the Hall of Wisdom.
Yeah, and also, He-Man's and his interaction in the past, he was an active participant in ultimately what was unfolding, and he didn't know it at the time. There's some fun little timey-wimey stuff and some interesting stuff about, he's trying to get information from the Orlax, obviously. But that stuff was, they wanted me to do that because of my connection to the Orlax, I guess, because I was like, I'm going to name him the Orlax of Primaria. They also let me do stuff like name like the realm of Apollyon in the heart of the Great Perpetua, which if you just turn me loose and let me just start doing things like that. I love like that kind of world. Not just, I like the world building that involves wordsmithing. Like if I can come up with titles and names for things like that, I love it. So that was stuff I was really attracted to. But the biggest thing that really attracted me to it was the Evelyn story. I mean, I'm a huge Evelyn fan, and I knew that what I was going to be doing in that issue was the closest thing to an episode of Revelation as we were going to get in the show, and it's directly tied to episode 8. And Dia wrote a scene where we see young Lynn, and she's, we get a glimpse, and I thought, well, let me take that glimpse and then expand out a little bit and just widen the lens a little bit of the angle on that, so we can see a little bit more of what happened before and what happened after and what led her to really, into the clutches of Skeletor and Hordak. And so that was the issue that I was most looking forward to, and I'm really proud of it. I think that it's I just like getting in Evelyn's head, because I don't think she's evil. I don't know if you can tell, but I don't think she's evil. I think that she's just has far too much depth to be something as simple as evil. And I think the name Evil Lynn is a facade. I think it is, you take that name so that your enemies will underestimate you, I think. And your friends.
I think in regards to Evil Lynn and who she is, and, like what Orko says, she's not born evil and all this stuff. One of the themes that kind of came through for me in watching Revelation was we're really exploring two different relationships. We're exploring the relationship of Adam and Tila, and kind of, how they feel about each other and where that ultimately leads and what the underlying truth of that relationship is, which is love. And then you have this relationship between Evil Lynn and Skeletor, and how, what that leads to.
Is that really something that version of love? It's not a joke of Harley Quinn in a way. There's no question. I mean, we were dealing with some really adult ideas of, He-Man and Tila's relationship is so much less complex than they think it is. So they're very much like teenagers, thinking that they have a very much more complex. They love each other. Like, that's it. Like, all they have to do is just accept the fact that they love each other, and then, right? I mean, that's kind of it. Yeah. We all feel like that. I think we all feel that way about them, right? I don't know. Maybe I feel like most fans I talk to think that.
I'll tell you this real quick. I tell this to everybody I can, but that's how I've seen their relationship for as long as I've been a fan, to the point where when my wife and I got married 16 years ago, we had He-Man and Tila action figures as our cake toppers on our wedding cake.
Wonderful. It's wonderful. And we've seen it in the expanded universe, other parts of the lore, right? I mean, we know that they have this connection. But it's simpler than they're making it. The difference is, the flip side of that is Skeletor and Evelyn have a very complicated relationship that they treat as simple, and that is ultimately to its detriment and to their detriment, both of them. They need to take more care with each other. Both of them do, and they don't, and it has repercussions.
Yes. Okay. So earlier we were talking a little bit about, that issue with Skeletor and whether he's lying or not, with the ambiguity that he presents in that issue. It feels ambiguous up until the very end, and then he pulls out that amulet that is the amulet that his wife was wearing.
In the story he might have made up, sure, I mean,
right.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that amulet is just, it's a question. I mean, look, there's there's a lot of different, there's more. Those aren't the only two ways to read that issue, that he's either telling you the truth or that he's lying. There are other ways to read it as well. And I think the truth might be a little bit more complex and gray than the black and white version.
Yeah. Well, what's that? Can you share a little?
No.
All right, enough said.
And I think maybe you know why.
Yeah. Maybe we'll know more in the next coming year or two.
I did not say that.
You did not. You did not.
For official reasons, I did not say that. No, right? But I do. But look, I believe you said that, not me. I did. That my hope is that someday we'll get to explore that. I mean, I would love to get to do some more comics and explore some more of that stuff. But I really thought it was important to leave. In fact, maybe they'll remember it differently, but I'm pretty sure I said to Kevin and Rob, like, they were a little bit more definitive about the ending of that story and that issue. And I said, I think we need to leave it open-ended. Like, I think we need to leave it like there's a question about whether this is true or not, or what. And because I don't think that, I don't feel comfortable saying here and now in a prequel book, when we haven't even released the whole show, like, that this is definitively how his origin plays out. Like, I wanted to make sure that there was room for it to expand or contract or whatever, maybe I'm just protecting myself, I don't know, but so I said, I pitched them the idea of how I wanted to do it. I showed it to them and they liked it, sort of leaving it with more of a question. And yeah, the amulet does lead you to believe that he's telling the truth. But who knows? So I can tell you a really great story about this mouse. And I'm holding the mouse as real, but maybe the story is complete crap.
Well, but the whole Skeletor Keldor angle. Like, Filmation has always been
who? Skeletor and who? No,
Filmation has always presented Skeletor as a demon from another dimension. Then later in the
many comics that we had that, right? Like, he was a demon from another dimension. That was what we were that's what we were wanting to explore in the comic. Yeah.
Right. So he's definitely, is that realm real? The one you named, Realm of Apollonios? I can't pronounce it correctly.
The realm of Apollonios in the heart of the great Perpetuum.
Yes. Is that real?
As far as I'm concerned, yes. And I wrote it, so yeah, it's real. But I can't. I don't speak for Mattel, who actually is the IP holder. So they come here and say it's not real. Like, I don't know, and I'd be like, well, what did I do then? What am I doing?
All right. What about this? And I hope the amazing idea of the Havoc staff being the head of one of Skeletor's enslavers. Is that real?
I mean, it's real in the story, right? I mean, it's real.
It's really cool,
but it also could really be a.
All right. Well, whose idea was that? That was a terrific idea and a terrific visual.
It was cool.
I think it was. I'm willing to take the blame for it because more people hated that than liked it. So I'm willing to say.
What? I love that moment.
Oh, it's a wonderful moment.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I think that was something that I pitched and wanted to do, I thought it would be fun.
There's
Even
really
if it
backlash over that. I didn't know.
there's a feeling that it might trample upon other parts of the lore in terms of the origin of the Havoc staff. So there's questions about that are perfectly legitimate.
Well, we always took it that when Ted Biaselli came out and said that, that everything in the Filmation show counted except 3 changes he made. One was Orko's power set. 2 was Roboto not being from another planet, but being built by Man-at-Arms. And number 3, the Sorcerers having baby Tila prior to becoming the Sorcerers with Man-at-Arms. He did indicate in an interview that everything else counted in that show. And as a spiritual sequel to that show, I always thought anything outside of that show in different lore you could pull from, but you didn't necessarily have to adhere to. Or were you worried about adhering to all of the lore out there as much as you could?
When we were in the room, I remember we bandied around some ideas that had to do with the 2000 show, and I think Kevin very clearly said, I think we don't need to spend too much time on that mythology. Like, this show is a sequel to the classic era, and so let's root ourselves in the classic era stuff and let ourselves be guided by that more so than later stuff in the comics or in the on TV. And then we're counting the Dolph Lundgren movie, obviously, in the classic era. Although I don't know if New Adventures would be. I don't know if we'd consider that. I don't know. We didn't talk much about that, happily, because that wasn't the time frame in which we were working, I think. So we got to avoid that question at that time.
I don't think a lot of us talked about the New Adventures too much.
Hey, I mean, to each their own. A lot of people that love it. So.
It's more He-Man, so that's good.
Yeah,
that's how I feel. That's when everybody complained about when the Star Wars prequels came out. I was like, okay, fine. Like, did you have legitimate concerns and notes about filmmaking technique or about storytelling? And I get all that. But can't we just at least spend a little time being happy that they made more? I'm just glad they made more. And the same thing with the sequel Star Wars stuff. People all, will go fight to the death over them. And I'm like, but they made more. I mean, maybe it's not what we all wanted, but it's what somebody wanted. And there's a lot of people who love it. So
I really think the silent majority loved it. There was so much love for this show, and we see a lot of it, and Colt and I just adore it. And it wasn't hyperbole. Your show, Masters of the Universe Revelation, is the reason why we exist. I mean, our mothers gave birth to us, of course, but you know what I mean. Why for Eternia?
To give birth to you, so that.
But why this podcast exists, this website exists, and there's been such a rejuvenated fandom. Fans that haven't thought He-Man since the Filmation show back in the 80s, that are suddenly have jumped, feet first right back into the community, and now are collecting the new figures and excited about the new series. And there is so much excitement we see around the show. And it was really a blessing for Masters of the Universe fans. I mean, we couldn't be happier.
You guys are the ideal audience, because I think you guys were the guys we were really making it for, because that's how we all went into it. We went into it wanting to celebrate classic He-Man, but in a way that gives you something new that had grown up with you, and wouldn't negate stuff that you hold dear, that we all hold dear, but would expand upon it and maybe give it some more, see it from some other angles with some more nuance. And so, yeah, I mean, I couldn't be prouder of the show from a writer's perspective. And and of Kevin, who, like I say, worked his ass off on this show, and I think just spectacular. He'd never run a writer's room before. He'd never worked with other writers. He the first day he was like, I don't know what I'm doing, you guys. And then within 2 minutes, he proceeded to like a master conductor of an orchestra, like take ideas from this one and that one and this one and like meld it all together. And, like he did everything that you want a showrunner to do in a writer's room. He just instinctively knows how to do that. And I think that comes from being a film director, working with all different departments and getting everybody on the same page. And, but, the love that we went into this with, I mean, it's the kind of thing we're, like I say, we're going to have with us for the rest of our lives because of the relationships too. I mean, with Eric and Dia and Mark and Kevin and Teddy and Rob and then Pat and Adam and everybody. I mean, we just felt like we were this scrappy little team of folks who were doing something that happened to get a lot of attention, but we were really a bunch of nerdy kids who were excited to play with these toys.
I think this is really going to grow on people too. I think in 10 years and 15 years, any of the rest of the naysayers are just going to die down and people are going to really appreciate the show. Where hopefully in 20 years, you guys will be sitting all together and it'll be a reunion just to discuss the wonderful thing you did.
I don't say this as a matter of self-promotion or anything. I think objectively it's a good show. Like, is it the greatest show ever made? I don't know what is. What I can tell you is this is a good show. Like, so, I'm proud of it. And everybody is. So good. That's why, and so is Netflix. And that is why, it's not the necessarily the end of the road, right?
All right. So you can't blame us for trying. Last question, Tim. Masters of the Universe Revelation. What can you tell us? Can you tell us anything?
Revolution.
Tell us everything.
Revolution. Masters. Did I say Revelation?
I don't know. I think you said Revelation. They're pretty close, which is on purpose. Yeah. Let's see. What can I tell you about Masters? I don't even think I can tell you that I have worked on it. Oh, I just let slip that I've worked on Masters. Oh, well, that's how that.
Oh no!
That's great. I was wondering if you were working on it because Kevin Smith did announce that he wrote one of the episodes, episode 5. He publicly announced that on Facebook. So I was like, is Kevin doing the writing duties now? So
5, and as a showrunner does, though. I mean, they usually write the first and last episodes, and
I guess what I mean in term two, there's only 5 episodes announced, and we weren't sure, right? They hardly gave us just a few morsels to chew on. So yeah, isn't that a shame? Only a few morsels to chew on.
Well, keep chewing, guys. I'll see you later. I can literally say nothing because it would be so unfair to all the people that are hard at work on the show right now. I will say this. This is what I will say. I was very, very touched and blessed to be asked to come back and do a little bit more work in this world that we all care about and so much, and that the experience for me was as if I had never stepped away from Revelation, and it is as joyful as it was then. So all the love and joy that went into creating Revelation is, as we speak, going into Revolution. And I know because I was, I've been there. I've gotten to experience it. So I hope people like it.
All right. Well, that's great. I believe that's all we have.
I'll come back when we can actually talk about something.
Ah,
that sounds awesome.
That sounds awesome. Seriously, you have a open invitation here, Tim. We appreciate you here. Whenever you want to come on, shoot the breeze, talk about Motu, please do. Even Transformers, even though I really struggled with those toys, Tim. They took forever to transform.
What am I going to do? I don't know.
Still can't figure them out.
It's the thing about
Yeah, it took me.
The show and the movie really got me into it, So there's something about those shows. It's the way that the Filmation show really got us into He-Man,
Oh, I love the show and Megatron and Starscream and their bickering but the toys, it took me 15 minutes to transform Starscream or Optimus Prime. And I was like, this isn't playing. This is work.
It's hard. It's so hard to play toys.
All right, that's fair.
Be honest.
I
graduated from Transformers to G.I. Joe at one point where I was like, yeah, I need a little less transformation. I just want to put the guys in the vehicles and have them fight.
I'm a simple fellow, Tim. I
can tell. I heard your question. No, I'm kidding. We're having a good time.
Yeah, we definitely are. So do you have anything that you wanted to address that we haven't touched upon here today, Tim, at all?
No, I just want to say that if you haven't seen The Long Halloween, the deluxe edition's coming out September 20th. So check that out.
Yeah.
I got a plug in. Did
I read something on Twitter that you hadn't seen it?
I have not seen the full cut of the whole thing together, which includes additional material that was cut from the two movies. So I haven't seen it all put together yet. So I'm excited. Wow. I can't wait to see it. It's going to have, lots of additional stuff. I know people keep asking me what the additional stuff is, and it's like, I don't technically know, but I know what I wrote that didn't make it in. And so, yeah, there's some stuff, and it's rated R, so that'll tell you the tone of the stuff that's going back in. So,
I can't wait.
Yeah,
and what about your current comics that you're working on?
Flashpoint Beyond is on shelves right now. It's a book that I've been writing with Jeff Johns and Jeremy Adams, and it's a sequel to Flashpoint, which a lot of people remember from 10 or so years ago. And it's been absolutely one of the most joyous experiences I've ever had, is working with those guys. And it's it's out monthly right now. So I think issue 3 just came out last week, and there's 3 more issues. It's a 6-issue series. And then I'm just hoping to get my butt in the door at Secret Stash Press, Kevin Smith's label at Dark Horse that he's announced. Yeah. So maybe I can get something past him, and me and Kev will be doing stuff back at Dark Horse again. Maybe we'll see.
Oh, that would be awesome. If you could do some more comics in the Revelation continuity, we would just adore that. So
I appreciate that. I mean, they would be very different than the Revelation comic. I mean, that had a lot of real specific things that I was trying and going for, and we wanted to do a version of the storytelling that they wanted to do, the 4 episodes basically. And I wanted to do the real heightened Orlax narrator language, which could be very alienating, I think, for some people to read. But it harkened back to an old era of comics for me that I just couldn't resist playing around with. But I think that, yeah, if I went back, I would love to go back and do some more. And I have some ideas, and it'll be a lot of fun. Basically, I just want to resurrect New Adventures in comics. You don't know. I could be crazy. You don't know. Maybe that's what I want to do.
Well, I bet you would do it good.
I couldn't do it worse. Oh wait, no, did I? No, I love it.
Definitely no worse.
I love it.
It's all good, and I got nothing but love for all those shows. That's what I'm gonna say. So.
That is really true, though. I really do love all of them.
Yeah. Even the bad ones.
Yep. Even the 87 live action film.
Yes. Huge love.
It's not an objectively good movie, but it's so fun to watch.
It's why we reference it. Revelation.
Yep.
Yep.
Gentlemen, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for spending so much time listening to me blather on. I hope you have a fun time editing down anything I said into coherent sentences.
We are not editing down a thing. We want 100%, Tim.
I can't wait to hear what the drop off is. Like, yeah, it was pretty much after hour 3 that people were like,
we would happily stay here for a few more hours chatting with you.
Well,
this has been really fun.
Yeah, we appreciate you like giving up your time to hang out with some Masters of the Universe Revelation nerds, soon to be Revolution nerds.
Yeah, that's right. We're Revolution nerds now.
Yeah. The revolution
has begun.
Right. Yep. All right. So, well, that's it. Tim, you were awesome. Thank you. Like I said, you have an open invitation here. Whenever you want to come on, please do. And thank you all out there for joining us today, either on YouTube, Amazon, Spotify, or Podbean. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, please give us a like and a subscribe. And for all the latest news surrounding Masters of the Universe Revelation and Revolution, please visit us at foreternia.com. So again, thank you, Tim. And thank you all for listening. And let the power return. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.